Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving into the lecture notes on what I like to call the original dysfunctional family, the gods of ancient Greece. You see these symbols, right? A trident, an owl, the lightning bolt? What do they even mean? Well, they're the calling cards for a council of gods absolutely defined by power, jealousy, and a ton of conflict. And believe me, their stories started long before they were calling the shots from their famous mountain home. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the gods themselves, look at the crazy family feud that got them into power, figure out who actually made it onto their Council of 12, do a little who's who, and then talk about why any of this still matters today. Okay, let's get right into it. The gods of Mount Olympus. So who were these famous 12 Olympians? Put simply, they were the most important, the most powerful deities in all of ancient Greece. They were the ones pulling the strings of human destiny from their home up on Mount Olympus. But here's the thing. To really get a handle on the Olympians, you can't just start with them. Nope. We have to rewind the clock, go back a couple of generations to a time of primordial beings and a very, very fateful prophecy about betrayal. So, how did this all begin? According to the poet Hesiod, our main source for this stuff, the universe kicked off with chaos, just nothingness. Out of that came Gaia, that's Earth, and Uranus, or heaven. And they had kids who became the next generation to rule everything, the Titans. Now, the head honcho of the Titans, a guy named Cronus, got some bad news. He heard a prophecy from his own parents that one of his kids was destined to overthrow him. So, what's his solution? A pretty gruesome one. He starts swallowing his children whole the second they're born. Talk about a terrible way to handle a succession crisis, right? But his wife, Rhea, she just couldn't take it anymore. She manages to hide their youngest kid, Zeus, and in a brilliant move, she tricks Cronus into swallowing a big ol' rock wrapped in a blanket instead. And that single act of deception, it lights the fuse for an all-out divine war for the cosmos. We call it the Titanomachy. So who gets the seat at the table now? Well, after a brutal 10-year-long war, Zeus and the siblings he freed, they win. They defeat the Titans and set up a whole new world order, ruled from their new headquarters, the legendary Mount Olympus. And they settled on a very specific number for this council, 12. This number is a really big deal. This group of 12 was known as the Dodecatheon, and it wasn't just some random number they picked. We see this tradition of worshiping the 12 popping up in places like Athens way back in the 6th century BC. So who are these Olympians technically? Well, they're a whole race of deities, basically the third and fourth generations of immortals in this cosmic family tree. You've got your first generation Olympians, the kids Cronus had for lunch, and then a second generation who are mostly Zeus's kids. But here's where it gets a little tricky. Who actually sits on the council? While the number was pretty much set at 12, the actual lineup could change. It turns out there was a big debate over who got that final, very coveted spot at the table. And it all came down to a choice between Hestia and Dionysus. On one hand, you have Hestia, the firstborn of Cronus and Rhea, the goddess of the home and the hearth. Very respectable. On the other hand, you have Dionysus, the youngest Olympian, son of Zeus, the god of wine and wild parties. Yeah, a bit of a contrast. So depending on where you were in Greece, you might get a different answer for who is on the official list. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Wait a minute, what about Hades? He's Zeus's brother. Shouldn't he be on the council? It's a great question, but nope. He's not considered an Olympian. Why? Because his kingdom was the underworld, which is way, way far from Mount Olympus. He was a Sthonic or underworld god, not an Olympian sky god. It's a whole different ballgame. Let's do a who's who on Olympus, and we'll start with that first generation, the children of Cronus and Rhea. First up, this core group is seriously powerful. You've got the big boss, Zeus, king of the gods, lord of the sky and thunder, and his symbol is, of course, the thunderbolt. Then you have his wife and sister, Hera. She's the queen of the gods, in charge of marriage, and her symbol is the peacock. Next is their brother Poseidon, the earth shaker, god of the sea and earthquakes, always carrying his trident. And rounding out this first group is Demeter, goddess of the harvest, represented by wheat. All right, now for the second generation. The rest of the council is pretty much filled out by Zeus's kids, and each one of them has their own powerful and super distinct area of expertise. First, we have the famous twins, Apollo, the god of music, prophecy, and the sun with his lyre, and his sister, Artemis, goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, and the moon with her bow and arrow. Then you have Ares, the god of war. We're talking the brutal, violent side of it. His symbols are the spear and helmet. And then there's Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, represented by the dove. Her origin story is something else. Some stories say she was literally born from sea foam. Okay, and to finish off our Council of 12, we have Athena, the goddess of wisdom and, importantly, strategic warfare. She had a pretty wild entrance, springing fully armed from Zeus's head. Her symbol's the owl. Then there's Hephaestus, the master blacksmith of the gods, always with his hammer and anvil. We've got Hermes, the super-fast messenger god, lord of travel and commerce, easily recognized by his winged sandals. And last but not least, nabbing that debated spot is Dionysus, the god of wine and parties, symbolized by grapes. So that's the lineup. But this all leads to the big question, the really crucial point. Why? Why are we still talking about these gods thousands of years later? What is their legacy? It's because the Olympian gods weren't just characters in old stories. They were walking, talking representations of really important parts of the human condition. Think about it. Justice, love, war, wisdom, creativity, these are timeless. They gave a face and a personality to the things that define our lives. And in doing so, they gave us a way to understand ourselves. And honestly, their real staying power comes from how human they were. As the World History Encyclopedia puts it, they had all too human qualities. They weren't perfect. They could be kind, for sure, but they could also dish out some terrible punishments. They argued, they cheated, they played favorites. They basically reflected our own strengths and, maybe more importantly, our own flaws right back at us. So that's it for our lecture today, but I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. If you had to pick just one Olympian to be the patron god of our modern world, who would it be? And more importantly, why? Would it be Hermes with commerce, Athena with wisdom, maybe Ares with all our conflict, or Apollo with communication? Think about it.